our channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Zelenskyy and his demands. I would like to remind you that several days ago the President of the United States of America announced that he was going to have a meeting with the President of the Russian Federation, and starting of that date we began receiving lots of updates and details, possible details, probably rumors, talks and so on, about Russia's demands for upcoming meeting. And you know that the most important thing is that the Russians reduced their expectations. So basically the Russians made a compromise regarding their demands that they probably introduced since the beginning of the special military operation. Once again, I would like to remind you that 3 months ago or even months ago the Russians demanded complete withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the territory of the Kherson region, including the city of Kherson. The same demands concerned the Zaporozhye region, including the city of Zaporozhye itself. Furthermore, the Russians demanded the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from the entire Donbas region, and the most important, the Russians demanded to save control over the territories they managed to take under complete control since the beginning of the special military operation in the Sumy region and of course in the Kharkiv direction. So those were demands of the Russian Federation and Putin himself probably 3 weeks or 4 weeks ago. But after Trump and Putin agreed to have another meeting on the territory of Alaska, the Russians reduced their expectations and reduced their demands. Basically, the Russians made something like compromises. And according to new Russian demands, they are ready just to, they are ready to exchange territories, let's say in Kharkiv region and Sumy region, for the rest of Donbas. So that's it. The Russians want just one thing: to take under complete control the Donetsk People Republic or the Donetsk Oblast or the Donetsk region, and that's it. And the Russians are ready to change territories they managed to take under complete control in Kharkiv area, in Sumy area, and in the Dnipropetrovsk direction for these territories, and that's it. So when talking about territories, the Russians, as you can see, reduce their demands completely. When talking about Ukrainian side, we can see completely different picture, because Zelenskyy, from his position, increased his demands significantly. For example, this is the statement that was made Zelenskyy after the virtual meeting with the European leaders. Today, 5 joint principles of the negotiation format were agreed upon with the US and Europe. So what Zelenskyy was talking about: no concessions on borders, no withdrawal from Donbas, security guarantees passed to NATO, European Union, sustained Western military aid, no forced demilitarization. Russian reparations, pay hundreds of billions in damages using frozen Russian assets. Return of abducted children and posts, 20,000 children taken, thousands of prisoners still held. No sanctions relief from Russia. Maintain and strengthen sanctions to prevent regrouping. So as you can see, Putin reduced his demands and Zelenskyy increased his demands in comparison with the previous version, which is very interesting. And this situation, first of all, shows us who exactly is seeking for the peaceful settlement of the conflict and who is trying to ruin the process, and most likely the Ukrainians is the part who is not ready yet for the beginning of this negotiation process. Now let's move further. Another interesting piece of news is coming from Russian Federation. Russia plans to test a new nuclear-powered cruise missile Burevestnik this week. The sources are saying that most likely the Russians are going to test this missile during summit on the territory of Alaska. The agency writes that observers note active activity at the Pankovo test site on the Novaya Zemlya archipelago in the Barents Sea, including an increase in personnel and equipment. So I would like to remind you that Burevestnik is a nuclear-based cruise missile that can be in the sky probably tens of even years, so there is no limit for them to stay in sky, which means that this can allow the Russians to shorten the distance before taking or before making another decision and the moment when this or that missile can reach the target. Now let's talk about Ukraine. A very interesting article today was published by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and by the Russian Secret Service. Today, the Russians reported that as a result of an intelligence operation that started in 2024, they managed to discover the production facility that Ukrainians use to produce their Subsans long-range missiles with help of German facilities and German companies. So Subsan is a ballistic missile that Ukrainians were about to finish production, and Ukrainians were planning to use these missiles to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. Their, let's say, range of these missiles varies from 500 till 700 kilometers. And if Ukraine uses these missiles, they most likely would be able to attack Moscow and lots of towns and cities all over the entire territory of the Russian Federation. And here we can see the comparison of maps and satellite pictures before and after Russians attacked this territory with Gerans and Iskander missiles. So the Russians are saying that they managed to collect not necessary information to discover positions of every single chain of production these Subsan missiles, and during 2025, more precisely during July of 2025, the Russians destroyed every single factory, and basically Ukrainian long-range missile, let's say, program was destroyed without even being started. Now let's talk about another video published from the northeastern part of Ukraine, very important one. Also, the pro-Russian resources published this video where we can see the HIMARS system of the armored forces of Ukraine that most likely Ukrainians deployed in this area with the purpose to attack positions of the armored forces of the Russian Federation along the border, probably as a part of preparation before the beginning of possible escalation along the border with Bryansk region in coming days. But when the Russians discovered this system, they destroyed it with Iskander attack.
Det er jo en fødselsdagsøl, så der har de været inde og skrive Silas. Han bliver 22 år, og her er så 20.
Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. We have lots of very interesting updates, and for this video once again we're going to start with the Pokrovsk direction, where both the Russians and the Ukrainians continue their offensive actions. Today we haven't received almost anything again, so we have some changes but they're too small. Let's compare the map between the dates to understand what kind of changes we might see on the map between the dates. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 30th of August of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 14th of August of 2025. So according to these changes, we see that currently the armored forces of the Russian Federation are focused to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Kucherev Yar, which is located between, let's say, the areas and edges of Russian breakthrough. I would like to remind you that during the previous days, the Russians, according to different media, managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of Zolotoy Kolodez, and the Russians managed to improve their positions in the direction of Vistole. And there is a settlement of Kucherev, where we can see most likely lots of Ukrainian soldiers who haven't fall back or who haven't gave up their positions, and they were caught and cooled by the Russians. And at first days of offensive operation, it was probably normal situation, but now these Ukrainian positions right in heart and right in center of Russian breakthrough have become something like a huge problem. Now the Russians are focused to take this territory under complete control, so that is why they're attacking this territory from three directions: from the south, from the northwest, and from the northeast. At the same time, we start receiving reports that Ukrainians either finished or about to finish their redeployment process. They brought lots of units, lots of very probably powerful or very popular or famous brigades and battalions and units of the armored forces of Ukraine. And first sources and first reports we got that Ukrainians launched their counter-offensive operation. One of the most important tasks, one of the most important things that Ukrainians are tasked to do is to maintain a corridor from the settlement of Kucherev Yar in the direction of the settlement by the name of Zolotoy Kolodez. The Ukrainians are trying to hold this position without giving Russians any chances to take this territory under complete control, because they understand if Russians are able to take Kucherev Yar under complete control, the Russians will be able to establish control with one of the most important roads, that road between the Russian positions in the southern direction and the northern part of the Donbas region. So this road is very important, despite the fact that this road is very small. If Russians establish control over this territory, the Russians will be able to get access to probably to their mechanized forces, and the Russians will be able to intensify their offensive operation, not just with sabotage and reconnaissance group, but also with armed vehicles, tanks, and so on. And I would like to remind you that since the beginning of this year, the Russians haven't almost used their tanks and vehicles in their combat operations. They were trying to accumulate as many as possible units, and most likely it's time to start using them. But to use them, first of all, you need to have good roads with good quality, without mines and so on. So this is the situation. Furthermore, the Ukrainians launched their counteroffensive from the area of Dobropolye, and at the same time, some sources are saying that with these counterattacks, Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation. And as we discussed in the previous videos, the 12th Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, Azov, is the unit that is going to become something like anti-retreat unit around and along this breakthrough pocket. Another important thing that the Russians currently are focused not just on taking under control the settlement of Kucherev Yar. The Russians are trying to advance further in the eastern direction with the purpose to establish control over the settlement of Toretska, Shakhovo, Vladimirovka. And according to information we have, during the previous 12 hours, the main updates and the main changes on the ground were recorded exactly in this direction. The Russians are advancing in this area from the east, from the south, and of course from the southeast, and of course from the west. But furthermore, according to different mappers, the Russians took under control around 20 or 30% of Vladimirovka, and the Russians continue their offensive operation and continue advancing further to the southern direction of Shakhovo. This is a very important area. Once again, the main value of this territory, of course, is roads that the Russians could use later for logistic purposes, for redeployment of heavy mechanized units like tanks, vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles closer to the line of combat contact. As for the western flank, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything from this direction, just small corrections and adjustments on the map according to different mappers. Probably the most interesting update was published by neutral mappers. According to this report, another mapper confirmed that the Russians managed to enter the mine by the name of Komsomolska. But I would like to remind you that several days ago, the pro-Russian resources colored this territory completely under Russian control. So we still have some doubts whether the Russians control every single square kilometer in the area of breakthrough. We believe that there are too many or a lot of pockets of resistance from the Ukrainian side, and both the Russians are trying to improve their positions and to get ready before the next wave of offensive operation and another breakthrough, which most likely is going to happen either today or tomorrow in the morning. As for the city of Pokrovsk, this is the second area of Russian offensive. This time the Russians are trying to advance along the railways and along T-06 road from the south in the northwestern direction. During the previous 24 hours, small changes on the ground were recorded in the area of the settlement of Lyantovichi. The Russians are tasked to get as close as possible to Grishino from the south and just to improve positions of Russian FPV drone operators. I'm not sure whether the Russians are able to cut M30 road physically, but the Russians can probably improve and concentrate FPV drone operators on this road, which will lead to almost to the same situation as if the Russians cut the road physically. Ukrainians suffer huge losses. They continue evacuation from the Pokrovsk agglomeration. The Ukrainians continue evacuation from the northwestern part of the Donetsk region. So the situation remains something like a chaos and panic, mainly from the Ukrainian side. The city of Konstantinovka. The Russians continue their offensive operation in this direction as well. The Russians are getting closer and closer. During the previous 24 hours, 2 more changes on the ground were recorded, and several of them were provided by pro-Ukrainian resources. We believe that by the end of the day, we're going to receive additional changes, especially in the northwestern and in the western part of the city of Chasiv Yar, in the direction of the settlements of Alexeyevka, Drushkovka, and Drushkovka. So this is another cauldron that is currently brewing, and most likely by the end or at the middle of the Russian Pokrovsk offensive operation, we're going to start watching and witnessing the crisis in the area of the city of Konstantinovka. As for the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians, as you can see, improved their position significantly. Basically, the Russians took under complete control positions along the Zherevets River on the Russian side. And we got another area of breakthrough in the direction of the settlement of Yampol. Currently, the Russians are trying to improve their positions and to get the settlement of Dronovka from the northwest and to finish the battle for the rest of the Serebryanka forest. And this battle, as we can see, is coming to a logical end. And that's it for the short video. Military summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.